What happens when the person accused of shoplifting is the very one tasked with enforcing the law? This isn't a story about a criminal caught in the act. It's about Nina Williams, a woman in power, facing the exact same treatment many of her community members experience every day. On a quiet Tuesday afternoon, Nina, the newly appointed police chief, entered a local boutique. She had just finished a long shift and hoped to unwind with a simple task: buying a pair of boots. As Nina strolled through the aisles, she had no reason to believe this would be anything other than an ordinary shopping trip. Little did she know, the moment she approached the counter, everything would change. The staff and security guards didn't recognize her. To them, she was just another black woman walking into the store, possibly looking for a quick steal. Nina had spent years climbing the ranks of law enforcement, overcoming countless challenges, and yet, on this day, in this store, she was nothing more than a suspect. It was an all too familiar experience, but for Nina, it was one that hit harder than most, because the accusations weren't coming from the community she worked to protect. They were coming from those who should have known better. Nina Williams was no stranger to obstacles. As one of the few black women in law enforcement, she had spent years proving herself in a field dominated by men, constantly battling both external and internal challenges. She had risen from a rookie officer to the city's first black female police chief, breaking barriers at every turn. Nina had earned her position through grit, determination, and an unyielding commitment to justice. But today, Nina wasn't walking into a precinct or attending meetings. Today, she was simply a woman on a break, trying to unwind after a demanding shift. The pressures of her new role weighed on her, but she hoped a quick stop at a local boutique would offer some relief. She had her sights set on a new pair of shoes, nothing too extravagant, just something to match an outfit for an upcoming community event. The boutique was a mix of high-end and casual items, the kind of place she could slip into unnoticed and take a moment for herself. Yet as she browsed, Nina couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. She had become used to being the subject of stares and whispers in her line of work, but today, there was an unfamiliar tension in the air. She brushed it off, focusing instead on the task at hand, buying a pair of shoes to complete her outfit. Little did she know, this simple act of self-care would soon spiral into something far more complicated. Nina strolled through the boutique, her mind still occupied by the demands of her day. She picked out a sleek pair of black boots, a perfect fit for the community event she'd be attending soon. As she approached the counter, she felt a sense of relief, a simple task to break up her busy routine. But as the young cashier, Heather, scanned the boots, Nina immediately noticed the hesitation. The usual friendly exchange was absent. Heather's eyes flickered nervously to the security guard standing near the back of the store. Nina's stomach tightened. She'd been here before, had felt this before. The subtle tension, the feeling of being watched, the almost invisible judgment that came with being a black woman in places where her presence didn't quite belong in the eyes of others. She shook it off, but it was difficult to ignore the way Heather's hand trembled slightly as she set the boots on the counter. The cashier's voice cut through the quiet. "Excuse me, ma'am, but I need to check something." Nina raised an eyebrow, not quite understanding the request. "Check something? What do you mean?" Heather didn't answer immediately. Instead, she glanced again at the security guards, who were now taking slow steps toward the counter. The two men, both dressed in security uniforms, seemed to size Nina up as they approached. One of them, a man in his late 40s with a stern face, was the first to speak. "We've seen you put those boots into your bag without paying for them," he said, his tone firm but with an edge of aggression. Nina blinked, her mind processing the accusation. "I've had these boots in my hands the entire time," she replied, her voice steady, despite the rising anger in her chest. "Are you accusing me of shoplifting?" The older security guard, Officer Mark Cooper, ignored her calm response, continuing his approach. The air between them grew thicker with every step. Nina knew exactly what was happening. It was racial profiling, plain and simple. She could feel the judgment in the air, the unfair assumptions being made about her because of her skin color. The tension in the store mounted as the security guards closed in, their steps slow but deliberate. Officer Mark Cooper, the older of the two, didn't break his gaze as he stared Nina down. He scanned her face as if looking for any sign of guilt, yet all Nina could feel was the weight of his assumption. His eyes flicked back to the other guard, who stood a few paces behind, his arms crossed and a silent judgment hanging between them. "We've seen you put those boots in your bag without paying," Officer Cooper said, his voice firm, almost accusing, despite the clear evidence to the contrary. Nina's heart began to race. She had been carrying the boots in plain sight the entire time. She hadn't hidden them, hadn't placed them in her bag. This wasn't a mistake, it was an outright accusation. She looked at Heather, the cashier, who stood silently behind the counter, her face flushed with discomfort. Nina could feel the stares of other shoppers now, sensing the shift in the atmosphere as the situation escalated. "Are you accusing me of shoplifting?" Nina asked, her voice calm but laced with an undercurrent of rising fury. Cooper didn't respond immediately, but his body language told the story. He wasn't about to back down. His posture was rigid, and his eyes narrowed slightly, sizing her up as though he didn't believe a word she said. The silence between them stretched for what felt like an eternity. The weight of it all started to settle over Nina. This wasn't just about boots or an accusation. It was a glaring example of the racial profiling she had faced countless times in her life, a reality she could never escape. She had worked so hard to reach her position as the first black female police chief in the city. But here she was, being treated like a common thief in a store. It stung more deeply than she expected. The anger she had buried deep inside, the frustration of always being seen through the lens of racial bias, began to boil over. "I've been working all day," Nina said, her voice steady but sharper now, unable to keep the resentment from creeping in. "I'm the police chief. I don't need to steal boots." The words hung in the air, clear and heavy, her eyes locked with Cooper's, daring him to deny her truth. But instead of backing off, the guard reached toward her bag, a silent threat in his gesture. Nina could feel her patience thinning, knowing full well that no matter what she said, the outcome would still hinge on how they chose to view her, as an authority figure or as just another black woman to be suspected. The silence in the store grew thick as Officer Cooper reached for Nina's bag, his hand hovering just inches away. In that moment, everything felt suspended in time, like the air itself held its breath. Nina's mind raced, the unfairness of the situation flooding her thoughts, but she held her ground. This wasn't just another moment of being misjudged. This was an affront to everything she had worked for. She had endured countless struggles to get to this point, only to be reduced to a stereotype once again. Then, with deliberate calm, Nina reached into her bag. She could feel the weight of their eyes on her as she pulled out her badge. The cold metal gleamed under the store lights as she held it up, the emblem of her authority flashing in front of them. The badge was unmistakable. "I am Nina Williams, the new chief of police," she said, her voice cutting through the growing tension. For a split second, no one moved. The room fell into a stunned silence. The manager, Rick, who had been standing off to the side, froze, his face drained of color as he stared at the badge in disbelief. Officer Cooper's eyes widened, his expression shifting from suspicion to disbelief, then to embarrassment. The reality of the situation hit them all at once. Nina stood tall, her gaze unwavering. The power dynamics had shifted in an instant. No longer was she the suspect. She was the one with authority, an authority that demanded respect and recognition, not just from her officers, but from every person in this room. Rick stammered, his apology falling over itself. But Nina didn't need to hear it. The damage was done. The accusation, the profiling, the disregard for her position, it all settled in her chest like a weight. The manager, visibly flustered, rushed toward Nina, his apology stumbling over his words. "I'm sorry, Chief. We didn't realize—" Nina held up her hand, stopping him mid-sentence. She stood tall, her posture unwavering, allowing the apology to hang in the air. She wasn't interested in hearing the excuse. "I suggest you train your staff and security better," she said, her voice sharp and controlled. She needed to make it clear that this wasn't a simple misunderstanding. It was a lesson in respect and accountability. Rick nodded, his face flushed with embarrassment, but Nina didn't wait for more. She turned and walked toward the door, the weight of the situation pressing down on her. As she stepped outside, the cool air hit her face, but it did little to cool the fire that had ignited within her. The irony of it all wasn't lost on her. Here she was, the leader of the very department meant to uphold justice. Yet she had just been treated like a criminal. It wasn't just about the boots or the accusation. It was a reflection of the deep-seated biases that still existed, even in the institutions she was trying to change. As she walked down the street, Nina's thoughts turned inward. Her role as police chief was about more than just enforcing laws. It was about challenging these very prejudices and reshaping a system from within. She knew that her work, the real work, had only just begun. Have you ever been unfairly judged because of your appearance or the color of your skin? Share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. We want to hear from you. Your voice matters, and together, we can spark a conversation that leads to change. If you believe it's time to challenge the biases that still exist in our society, hit the like button to show your support. Share this video with others to help raise awareness, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories that matter. By subscribing, you'll be part of a community that's committed to pushing for justice, equality, and real change. It's time for us to stand up and be heard. Let's continue this conversation, and let's keep fighting for a world where everyone, no matter their race or background, is treated with respect and fairness.